I'm gonna need some help with that. Hey, come here. Hi, you needed my help? Okay, yeah. Every time. Hey guys, today we are talking about IMOU IP cameras, in particular a Ranger 2C. Now, if you wondered why I have cloned myself, you probably want to watch this video in the corner, which will explain everything about that gag at the beginning of the video. But you are here to learn more about Ranger 2C, which comes in two flavors. Behind me you'll see they're almost identical. There is a 2 megapixel, which is 1080p IP camera, and there is also 2K version of it with a 4 megapixel camera sensor. Other than that, the devices are pretty much identical, so whatever I'm going to say in this video is going to apply obviously to both of them, unless I'm going to say otherwise. So what you get exactly in a box? Well, it's an indoor camera with a swivel and tilt, which means it will actually cover 360 degrees with the asterisk here. Why asterisk? Well, if the camera is placed too high, it only can tilt 5 degrees down, and it won't cover anything that is below unless it's mounted in an upside down position, which is handy because this camera actually comes with a bracket which allows for upside down mounting. Looking around the camera, you'll notice that it has micro USB for charging, but there is no Ethernet port inside, which means this is a Wi-Fi camera and it uses 2.4 GHz bandwidth to connect. I'd like to see some 5 GHz enabled camera, especially with a higher resolution. That would be quite interesting to take a look at. But anyway, moving on. At the back of this camera you will find also a speaker, and it's quite loud. Now the speaker is there because inside the camera there is also a microphone, which means you can enable Ranger 2C for two-way conversations. And as you probably noticed that the cameras behind me are moving freely, well, they are smart tracking devices, which means they will try to follow whatever the object is in the room around and record it as it moves, which is handy if that's not you in a room and you want to keep track of whatever is currently moving around your room, whether it's being a cat, dog, or intruder. If you lift up the dome a little bit, you'll notice the access to SD card, micro SD card, and a reset button. And that's pretty much end of the tour, really. So let's get that connected and talk about features. Ranger 2C series comes with motion detection and human detection, which means the camera will do its best to actually detect a human and let you know when a human is around instead of a pet running around. I do not have a pet, so I wasn't able to test it myself, but the motion detection is pretty sensitive. You have 5 different degrees of sensitivity, and the human detection was pretty much spot on in my tests. In fact, this device was capable of recognizing foxes across the street, which is around 30 meters away. That's quite impressive in terms of how well it detects the motion. When motion is detected, the camera will do its best to follow the target and record its wrongdoings. So for the most part, it's actually quite good, and you have to get out of your own way to escape that tracking. So if you're using the camera indoors with a wide angle equipped in Ranger 2C series, that motion actually is not going to be that great because for the most part, the camera is capable of seeing whatever is on the picture unless you're going to mount the camera somewhere in the middle of the room. What you can't do, unfortunately, is use that movement on a schedule. So you won't be able to pan around at will on a schedule. However, you can log into your IMOU app and start browsing around if that's what you're interested in. To avoid flooding your mobile phone with messages around movements, you have specific tools for your disposal, and that involves different schedules that you can select and get notified only within those schedules. You can also use the zones on the camera view to define which zones with a viewfinder would trigger the motion. It's very handy when you're actually trying to limit those notifications. Now, one of the relatively new features is actually built in now into the app. Those are small automation scenarios which you can use to set specific patterns for your cameras, and those will apply to all the IMOU cameras you have on your accounts. This will trigger on your geolocation or entering or leaving the house, allowing you to set custom behaviors not just on a schedule, but when you're actually leaving home, which is great actually because it will increase the security and it will decrease the number of annoying false positive notifications. And before we jump into video quality of both camera versions, I would like to assure you that all those features of tracking and motion detections working regardless of the camera resolution. So if you picked up 2 megapixel camera instead of 4 megapixel camera, you're not actually losing out. So let's focus on the video. Now, obviously the 1080p resolution or 2 megapixel sensor is going to be not as impressive as 2K1. Now, the differences are obvious. You won't be able to zoom in as much and get enough details, but there is another thing that differentiates both streams. Now, the 4 megapixel stream is actually slightly more saturated with less washed out colors, but that's the about only difference that I've noticed. For the most part, if you're using those cameras indoors, you can go ahead with 1080p camera version because there is enough resolution to cover the room and you won't find yourself really zooming in to get details of anything. Now, if your rooms are really spacey and big, you might consider a 4 megapixel sensor instead on your camera to get that extra resolution so you could zoom in and get that details from the other side of the room. But that's about it. The night performance is pretty good thanks to the built-in infrared LEDs and infrared capabilities of both cameras. And again, the level of details will depend on the sensor, but if you are using 4 megapixel one, then you've got a fair amount of details in there. I've mentioned before there is a speaker so you could have two-way conversation, so let's test it out on both cameras. This is recorded on Imou Ranger 2C 1080p or 2 megapixel camera, so you can see that actually that voice recording is pretty good. And this is now done recording to the mobile using the Imou Ranger 4 megapixel. And now this is 4 megapixel version of the Ranger 2C in the pitch black conditions. And while the built-in speaker isn't great, it's okay. I didn't find it, difficult to understand anything. The volume is quite loud, and built-in siren can announce or scare off a cat from a sofa, a dog from a sofa, and perhaps an intruder. And if you are on the receiving ends of the cameras, and if you are on the receiving end and using a mobile app, then the actual quality of built-in microphones isn't bad. I was able to get a nice audio from the cameras with a pretty good volume level, so yeah, I'll definitely recommend it for that. I've been a little bit shaky because the camera is designed for indoor use, but I've placed it outside on my windowsill for a couple of days to see how the camera would behave, and I was quite surprised with the level of details it was able to capture. I don't think you're gonna have any problems finding the motion events on your timeline. Speaking of timeline, we need to talk Imou because, well, while the app is pretty good, it allows you to display several cameras in a single view and you can dump the recordings onto your mobile easily. Well, the interface of the app itself is fine. However, browsing through the timeline, it's a bit finicky. That timeline is way too small and honing into particle motion events is just annoying. Now, fortunately, those events are actually saved as cards so you can access the events itself. But if you want to access a specific moment in time on the timeline, then you'll find yourself scrolling left and right to kind of get the pointer in the right position. It takes way too long. Now, another thing that you could improve is actually timeline loading. It takes a couple of moments to actually get the timeline fully loaded so you could scroll it. If you start scrolling too quickly, you will be greeted with the message, "No recording found." Don't worry, just give it a couple of moments and let the timeline load properly. While we're talking about storing the footage, there's a couple of problems here. First, wherever files are stored on the SD cards, they're not usable on the computer. You have to export them via app, which is, let's face it, annoying. Now, yeah, you can export it and convert it via app to MP4 files, so you could share it around, but it's a lengthy process, and I wish that was just MP4 file being stored on the card itself. It's probably done to enable indexing and save up on the space, as the 32 gig card will last around 3 to 4 days depending on which camera you're using. Poking around the app, I found also a lot of features to actually set the cameras the way you want, including HDR, different time zones, etc, etc. So give it a poke and you'll be happy with your setup. What you're not going to be happy is actually current Alexa skill integration, because right now it's, well, unusable. It's not just the camera is constantly buffering, and I was moving the cameras around to validate that it's not the current setup, but also audio was not usable as well, introducing a big level of noise. Something that left me really confused because, well, the app works just fine. Another thing that annoys me is that while Imou is allowing you to download the Windows software so you could use it as an NVR, the experience is subpar as well. While you can preview the cams and direct them around without any problems and set different configuration, that's great, the timeline feature is completely not working. I was trying to browse the timeline and not a single time I was successful with it. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, I didn't have a luck. And what makes it even worse, when I was scrolling through the timeline, I've noticed that doing so actually reset the camera. Since we've got Windows software, I started to wonder if a real-time streaming protocol is supported so you could set the cameras with your custom NVR system. Now, it kind of is. It's not described anywhere, and I discovered it while reviewing Imou Bullet. If you're interested in that, the Bullet review is here. It's the outdoor camera from Imou as well. So if you want to set it up, it is possible, and I was able to successfully stream the content from these cameras to a VLC player. So I will leave the detailed instructions how to do it because it's not as straightforward in the associated article. Lastly, if you are not happy with NVR setup and you don't want to do it yourself and you think that the SD card isn't enough, then Imou also has custom storage plans for you. They range from a couple of quid a month to £70 a year for the highest possible plan, which is 30 days of storage. Now, that doesn't have a cap on the actual storage. However, you will be storing only motion events. There are no plans for continuous recording. I would like to thank Imou for sending me this so I could take a look. So if you're interested, in the description of this video, you're going to find the links to the cameras itself. Now, they retail for about 35 to 40 pounds in UK. So if you fancy this and you are able to live with a couple of limitations that I've introduced in this video, which hopefully gonna get fixed, then knock yourself out and use the links below to get yourself one of these. And like I said, you don't have to buy the 4 megapixel one to get the same functionality. I think unless you are needing one for the large room or something like that, then you'll be perfectly fine with 2 megapixel one. I'm going to tell you that you know how YouTube works. I'm not going to teach you that, but subscribers count. But what I would like really you to do to visit my social media and follow me on there if you want to keep the conversation going, ask questions about the projects, reviews, etc. As for now, there is no posting schedule. Keep the eyes peeled to your timeline and soon you'll see another video from me. Take care. Bye. And bye, cameras. Yes, you're looking at me now. Bye.